You're watching Play, the home of non-stop music and comedy TV.
It was like art rock, but it had real tunes.
It was the most revolutionary thing you could ever imagine.
Some of the greatest modernist art of the 20th century.
Whatever Ian was singing and talking about, he meant it.
Out of the turmoil of 1970s Britain, unknown musical pleasures were revealed to a growing audience by one of the most revered and influential bands that emerged from the punk revolution.
Confusion in her eyes, it says it all. She's lost control.
Their dark, brooding music still marches, alienated, seemingly isolated from the mainstream, yet triumphant across our musical landscape today.
She gave away the secrets of her past and said, I lost control again. And of a voice that told her when and where to act, she said, I've lost control again.
In a way, there was still a wartime spirit. There was no sort of sense of adventure at all. And in that sense, I do feel that it was a post-war period. It did all start in Manchester at the Leicester Free Trade Hall when the Sex Pistols came up. What had happened prior to then is all our generation would be going to the Manchester Free Trade Hall and we would be seeing like bands like Pink Floyd and even Bowie and everything. There seemed to be a distance and it seemed to be very far removed from your own experience, and there seemed to be no way you could ever break into that. The Sex Pistols coming up to the Leicester Free Trade Hall, it was in a very small room. They were only about 4 metres away from you. And it was the most revolutionary thing you could ever imagine, because it did seem like you were thrust into the future and you thought, I could do that.
And we don't care! When punk happened, it was a real revolution. I remember seeing the Buzzcocks and the Sex Pistols, and feeling, realising that this was something that was major, very, very important.
There's a weird kind of combination of right time, right place, and a hunger and an enthusiasm. And if you're in your teens at that point, everything seems so desolate and broken down and distant from your own experience. And suddenly you had a chance to make it directly, connect with how you felt and what you wanted to do with it.
Suddenly all the rules were movable and you could experiment, basically. Punk just took the chains and the shackles away from everybody, and you could do whatever you wanted. And some people did stuff that was very extreme. This was Thatcher's Britain. This was a woman in charge of the country, destroying whole communities. The young generation growing up, who actually thought about things, genuinely felt alienated. When punk arrived, it was a vehicle for a lot of musicians to express their anger and rebellion against what was going on, because the country was a bloody awful place.
From some other's womb, just like any other room.
With DIY punk band fever sweeping the country, two old Salford school friends, Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook, along with Ian Curtis from Macclesfield, formed a band. Stephen Morris, also a reject from Macclesfield King's Grammar School, later joined the band as the drummer.
Punk used to say, sooner or later someone had to invent a way for it to say, I'm and that was Joy Division.
To the center of the city in the night, waiting for you. To the center of the city in the night, waiting for you.
Initially billed as Stiff Kittens, the band immediately rejected the punk overtones of this first incarnation and renamed themselves Warsaw. They developed an early musical chemistry that heavily encouraged experimentation, which eventually saw them settle on the name Joy Division.
I got the impression that Ian felt that punk was, it was very brash and it was very aggressive and all those things, and he felt that punk had made its statement. And for the first 6 months of, say, the Sex Pistols' career, it was very exciting and it was fantastic and it was valid and all those things. But after about 6 months, all of a sudden there were like thousands and thousands of so-called punk bands, all desperately trying to prove their own cred. And I think Ian particularly wanted to get away from that.
Joy Division's sound kind of came out of various things. It sort of came out of krautrock, as in like Can and Neu particularly. It came out of Pere Ubu. It came out of some key Brian Eno tracks. It was a sort of treated industrial punk sound, if you like.
It was a kind of weird combination of Iggy Pop and Kraftwerk, but other things as well, I think. I mean, Curtis's reading was really important, and in the big mixture then, if you were interested in punk, you were being turned towards things like William Burroughs and J.G. Ballard.
He loved T.S. Eliot, for example. He was a huge fan of poetry. So lyrically, he was kind of already moving quite far away from punk in the first place. And there was an intensity and a kind of heaviness. Joy Division was very emotional. It was very, very dark, and you knew that there was something very, very serious about it.
You can tell from the track Isolation on Closer, Joy Division's second album, already begins to have those synthetic Kraftwerk moments.
Ian was influenced by a lot of stuff, and it wasn't all particularly musical. He was fascinated by Werner Herzog film and, as I say, literature. I think his influences were very, very mixed.
It sounds simplistic, but it was about art. There was an artistic inspiration going on, and you wanted to mix everything up.
As was standard in the punk ethics of the 70s music scene, Joy Division released their first record through a small indie label in the hope of attracting major label interest. Factory Records co-owner Tony Wilson saw the band's potential for the company from an early stage.
The manager of Joy Division, Gretton, who sat down with me one day and went, before we go to Warner Brothers, why don't we do our first album with you? And are you sure? Why? Well, and his real why was he'd noticed that the single he'd done with us had cost £4,000 and made 4,300, and the group had got 100 quid, or 80 quid, which was split between the four groups, the profit. And he'd seen it work, and he knew the economics of the music business. Album sales are where the money is. I then said, how much would it cost to do the album? He said, Martin Hannett says £5,000. My mother had left me £10,000. The album cost £10,000. And we pressed, that was Unknown Pleasures. We pressed 10,000, delivered 5,000 from the plant to Rough Trade, Pinnacle, to all the independent distributors. The other 5,000, which we hadn't pre-sold, came back on a van, or truck, and Alan Erasmus, Rob Gretton and I happened to be sure we were out of town, so Hooky carried all the boxes till 4 in the morning up the 2 flights of stairs to the flat we were working out of. The next 5,000 sold within a month. At that point, you've done 10,000 albums, you're in business as a company.
And she expressed herself in many different ways until she lost control again.
Released in August 1979, their first album, Unknown Pleasures, has been lauded as groundbreaking in its use of soundscapes and its attempts to redefine alienation.
She's lost control.
You just knew, your instinct knew somehow, something feeding back from the future, that there was a timeless piece of universal work had taken place out of this strange hotspots of influences and the punk scene in Manchester. They instantly went far beyond being a local band who you knew, and suddenly became slightly intimidating, because this was really special, and this seemed to belong to that world of Eno and Iggy and the Velvet Underground, and it seemed to fit right in. You think of David Bowie's Low, suddenly there was an album made by the local band Joy Division that was on a par, and that was incredibly exciting.
The style was very important to Tony, the look of the thing, the way the thing was packaged, and far from overshadowing what was going on at Factory, Joy Division made it possible for Tony to indulge, if you like, a lot of these ideas he had.
Dance, 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 dance to the radio. Dance, 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 dance to the radio. Oh, I was called out when the going gets tough. Things you've learned are no longer enough. Well, now it's the sound, it's all we need to know. Synchronize love to the beat of the show. And we could dance.
The creative vortex of Factory Records and Joy Division expressed itself in a near-total symbiotic relationship. A number of key characters, such as designer Peter Saville, part of the Factory gang, shaped the image and overall look of the band.
Well, the madness of Factory Records and the madness of the collective suited the madness of Joy Division, and it filled in a lot of gaps for the group. And so in the same sense that they were asking, their producer Martin Hannett, that they wanted to sound a certain way, and lo and behold it happened. Also in terms of the way it fitted into a package and fitted into a kind of image, happened because of Factory. If that initial album Unknown Pleasures had looked a different way, say there was a picture of the group on the cover, and it was a much more traditional looking record, a lot more corny, that would have affected the whole thing as well, because there's no doubt that the things bled into each other and made a huge difference in terms of perception and how the thing grew.
Coming up in Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, the division between joy and sadness becomes ever wider as feelings of isolation become acute for one member of the band. And as the new musical dawn fades, tragedy becomes a reality.
Martin Hannett, the producer, amazing. I mean, it was just the whole vibe of the band that just created the texture and the tension.
All great bands, when they make those first records, need someone who understands what they're after, otherwise it won't happen. So if they say, look, we want it to sound a bit like Kraftwerk meets Iggy Pop, then you really need someone to make that happen. And Martin Hannett could clearly make it a reality with his own spaced out view of sonics.
No matter which band he worked with, he had a sound. I don't know how he got it. It was dirty. It just set a vibe. His sound set a vibe with every band he worked with.
He always used to put loads of odd effects and echoes on things to make things look even more starker than they were. But I think that's part of the imagery that they were playing around with as well.
Guitars didn't sound like guitars per se, and the drums didn't sound like rock and roll drums, and the bass certainly didn't sound like a kind of conventional bass.
Step inside. This is the way, step inside.
He was able to set this vibe and this darkness. I guess he was a really dark guy, and basically he was able to capture the band's performance, but also bring this ambient thing to it. I think he's incredibly underrated.
Martin Hannett, the legendary record producer, built his reputation working with such groups as Slaughter and the Dogs, the Stone Roses, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, Kitchens of Distinction and U2. But it was his seminal work with Joy Division that fully established his global profile. Epileptic, depressive and a substance abuser, Ian Curtis was the focus for the public's fascination with Joy Division. The strange, charismatic frontman brought his enthrallment with German sensibilities and history to the band.
We're talking about German romanticism and German left-wing filmmakers as well as things German. But there was a German obsessiveness there.
This obsession had worked its way into the name of the band, the neoclassic style of the band's image, and the Nietzschean nihilism of the music. This artistic focus has led to over 20 years of accusations that Joy Division was fascist.
There was something vaguely sinister about Joy Division. There was something very sinister about the name.
And the kind of tantalising idea of Joy Division being named after the prostitute wing of a concentration camp, you know.
They were just trying to do something that was interesting. They were certainly not trying to wave swastikas around or anything like that.
For somebody like Joy Division to come along and mess about with the imagery was beyond irresponsible, really. It wasn't even irresponsible, it was just daft and stupid, and they shouldn't have done it.
The physicality of Ian was completely separate, because off stage, off screen, so to speak, you know, he was quite timid and still. As soon as the singing was involved in the performing in front of people, he just became a completely different person. You know, I suppose then you were seeing the aged, wise person. Off screen, off stage, you were seeing a kid almost, bony kid, you know, with a pint and very shy. And on screen, a monster, you know, living out his nightmares.
Curtis was like just this completely angst-ridden, tortured kind of guy, you know what I mean, who wasn't even trying to sing, was kind of talking over the records in a lot of ways.
He wanted to find areas that no one had been before, and people were giving him a searchlight and showing him areas. Iggy showed him an area, Kraftwerk showed him an area, Ballard and Buzz and German filmmakers, they all showed him areas he could go into, but he wanted to make sure he was the first one there.
It wasn't about a fashion or a trend or something that was going on at the time. It was of itself.
I mean, I think that was something else that was so startling, the difference between off stage and on, between the everyday person who was the thinker, and then the person on stage who turned those thoughts into incredible sort of art. You know.
Married with a young child, Ian sought solace from the pressures of family life and the band's growing success in the arms of other women, eventually having a passionate affair with Belgian Annick Honnold.
With Ian, you know, the idea of the sex and drugs and rock and roll, it's mixed in there, there's no doubt about it, because if you're into Iggy and you're into the Velvets and everything, that whole thing is there as part of the myth. It's part of risking your life, in a way, for the sake of your entertainment, for the sake of your art, you know, taking it that seriously.
At that moment in time, Joy Division seemed to have everything that a young audience of, say, especially young men, wanted. It was physically exciting, but it was thought-provoking and absorbing.
A bunch of boys fell in love with him. They kind of fantasised about being as deep as Ian and as emotionally racked as Ian, and that kind of, you know, it really was a kind of, you know, sparrows coughing on the windowsills in the bleakest of Manchester with grey skies, the sun never shone, life was awful, you know, how brilliant is this? He was a pretty good-looking guy, and they were captivated by him, but it was a kind of fairly homoerotic kind of thing as far as I could see.
He just looked like a kind of haunted sort of poet murderer figure. I mean, that just was tremendously romantic to me. I mean, you know, he was a romantic figure because his songs were about articulating extreme alienation. And at that age, I felt incredibly alienated, and I just identified intensely with what he was saying.
But it would be their greatest hit, Love Will Tear Us Apart, that would be their most telling tale.
They kind of created this kind of industrial long raincoat type of bleak mystique, this very existential angst kind of thing, and then the guy committed suicide.
As soon as we arrived in Manchester, they said, "Oh, have you heard about it?" And I said, "No." He said, "Oh, Ian's dead." And I was like, "Oh," because it was like, you're not really expecting people to die on you, are you? You know, and especially not kill themselves.
When Ian died, I was very upset. Everybody was upset, and it was a terrible, terrible blow.
Returning home to watch his favourite Herzog film on television after what could be described as an argument with his estranged wife, Ian hanged himself in the family home on the 18th of May 1980.
He just looked like someone who just had sort of doom written all over him, you know. Seemed to me always like he was already had one foot in the next world.
I wrote two pieces of music for Ian. One I called Prayers to Broken Stones. There's a quote from a T.S. Eliot poem, The Hollow Man, and the second tune I wrote was called The Missing Boy.
Watch with obsession, some accident of music. This is a crisis I knew had to come, destroying the balance I'd kept.
It's been said that the fatal combination of the breakdown of Ian's personal life, his depression, drug use and epilepsy ended the life of a poetic thinker that was of immense loss to the artistic world.
To live, I was foolish to ask for so much. Without the...
To some degree one was aware of Curtis's problems, but he was just such a baffling and sort of shadowy, recalcitrant figure. It was hard to know really what was going on. The sort of everyday Ian Curtis was very different from this Dostoevskian figure that you saw on stage, and I mean these sort of spasmodic kind of movements.
Watching the realism.
The Monday after his death, Ian had been due to fly to the US to begin their first tour. It looked like the band was going to be a global as well as a UK success. Devotees of Joy Division can only wonder what could have been.
If Ian had only got on that plane on Monday morning, if he got to New York, he'd have his way across America, which is not the way we like to think about our late dead heroes, but it probably is very accurate. He might have had a pretty wild time and got over the terrible situation he was in at home.
Just can't function no more. But love will tear us apart.
Love Will Tear Us Apart was released just after Ian's death and became Joy Division's crossover hit that moved the band into the mainstream. The second album, Closer, came out shortly afterwards.
I mean, I actually like Closer a lot better than I like Unknown Pleasures. It was such an unusual sounding record. It was like art rock, but it had real tunes, you know.
I don't think I've ever played like one track or diss track from either Unknown Pleasures or Closer. When I listen to those records, I listen to them from beginning to end, every time. They're both perfect records. I don't think Joy Division is something you dip into. They're like kind of novels to me, both those records.
After the tragic passing of their lead singer, the band continued, but as New Order. With such hits as Blue Monday and World in Motion, the band has risen from the ashes of Joy Division to achieve worldwide success.
Some rock historian that probably watched their Mojo said that everybody that bought a Joy Division record probably formed a rock and roll band, you know.
Lots of groups that have been influenced by Joy Division, you know, Nick Cave or Radiohead or Nirvana or Ministry or Depeche Mode or The Cure. You can see Joy Division everywhere.
20 years later, you kind of like look back at Joy Division and you just go, you know, they were so unbelievably good and they were so unbelievably special and they were so unbelievably individual.
When something's real, there's a truth to something, then it doesn't fade away. It does continue.
It's always good to review things that you think you know, because they always sound different. I've always noticed that, you know, like Heraclitus said, you can't step in the same stream twice. And it is true that even after a while, if you listen to their music, which you know inside your head, but when you listen to it again, it sounds completely different.
Good night.